Under the thick grey clouds hanging over Berlin in 1941, Hermann Göring strutted into a briefing room filled with Nazi officers and production specialists, his polished boots echoing against the marble floor. The Luftwaffe chief carried himself like a man convinced of his own myth, unshakable, untouchable, a peacock wrapped in medals. Reports from the United States lay on the table before him, describing a new industrial mobilization plan that aimed to build an unimaginable number of aircraft. Göring picked up the document, skimmed the pages, and burst out laughing. His voice boomed around the room as he mocked the figures. 50,000 planes, he scoffed. Americans can't build 50,000 bicycles without breaking something. This is ridiculous. Officers around him laughed. In their minds, America was slow, disorganized, dividing, capable of transforming its peaceful civilian factories into engines of war. But across the Atlantic, another world was already forming. In Detroit, sparks flashed across steel as assembly lines began to shift from cars to bombers. The clang of machines echoed through the cavernous Ford plant at Willow Run, where men and women poured into the factory before sunrise, lunch pails in hand, their faces set with determination. Many had never touched aircraft before. Some had never held a wrench, but they learned fast. And the air smelled of oil and ambition as a new kind of American army, an industrial army, took shape under the fluorescent lights. Every day, trains delivered endless rivers of aluminum, rubber, and engines to factories that had once made refrigerators, typewriters, or washing machines. Workers moved with a rhythm that became almost musical, riveters hammering wings, welders sealing metal ribs, mechanics tightening bolts along the fuselage. For the first time in American history, assembly lines produced bombers the same way they produced automobiles. A man could watch a B-24 Liberator roll off the line the same week he punched in for his first shift. The stakes were rising across the world. Nazi bombers screamed over Soviet cities, Japanese Zeros prowled the Pacific sky, and the Allies needed aircraft for every mile of airspace they hoped to hold. Yet the United States was still climbing out of the Great Depression, and many wondered if America truly had the strength to match the Axis powers who had been preparing for war for years. Factories had to expand, workers had to be trained, and raw materials had to be shared between tanks, ships, guns, and aircraft. But despite the doubts, President Roosevelt insisted the target, 50 planes a year, was not just possible, but essential. We must be the great arsenal of democracy, he declared, and his words cut through every workshop like a spark to gasoline. In California, the Douglas aircraft plant glowed through the night as thousands of workers, men, women, immigrants, farmers, machinists, teenagers, labored through double shifts. Inside the hangars, enormous bomber frames hung like metallic skeletons waiting for their wings. Coffee steamed from tin cups. Radios crackled with news from the war front, and in the break rooms, workers pinned up newspaper clippings of Göring boasting about the Luftwaffe's dominance. Some taped his mocking quotes to the walls above their workbenches. Those words became fuel, something personal. If the Luftwaffe chief believed Americans couldn't do it, then every rivet hammered into those wings felt like a reply. In Kansas, Boeing's factories thundered day and night with the construction of the B-17 Flying Fortress. The workers there could feel the urgency in their bones. They heard stories of downed crews over Europe who needed replacements, of ground troops desperate for cover, of entire villages erased by Axis bombing raids. Every plane built could save lives. Every bomber shipped overseas might mean fewer telegrams delivered to American mothers back home. The pressure was crushing, but the purpose was clear. And slowly, the factory walls began to tremble from the roar of engines being tested. Row after row of bombers wheeled out into the sun, their silver bodies gleaming like giant metallic birds ready To take flight by 1943, something extraordinary happened. American factories began surpassing every estimate. 50,000 planes was no longer a goal. It was a starting point. Factories built so many aircraft that storage fields overflowed with rows of brand, new fighters and bombers stretching into the horizon like a metal forest. Willow Run alone produced a bomber every hour. Workers posed proudly beside planes they assembled, signatures scrawled along panels that would soon cross oceans or disappear into clouds over enemy territory. And deep inside the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin, someone placed a new report on Göring's desk, this one stating that America had not only reached its impossible target, but had doubled it. Göring stared at the report, his face tightening as he read each line. The numbers were impossible, absurd, yet undeniable. America had produced more aircraft in a single year than Germany could hope to build in 3. It wasn't just the scale that stunned him, but the speed, the relentlessness, the sense that an entire nation had stood up at once and turned its factories into weapons. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a flicker of fear, though he buried it beneath bluster and excuses. He blamed sabotage, shortages, even the weather. But the truth was spreading through the German high command like a cold draft slipping under the doors. The Americans had awakened, and their machines were coming. Across the ocean, the roar of countless engines filled the morning sky over Allied airfields. Rows of B-17 sat like armored giants ready to roll. P-51 Mustangs gleamed under the sun, each one a symbol of how far U.S. production had come in such a short, brutal span of time. Pilots climbed into cockpits built by workers they would never meet. Many would not return, but none doubted the machine behind them, the unstoppable tide of American industry that replaced what was lost and built what was needed faster than war could destroy it. In England, ground crews stood in muddy fields watching transports arrive with crates stamped Made in USA, filled with spare engines, new propellers, and replacement wings. One mechanic wrote in a letter home that he'd never imagined a nation could build planes faster than the war could shoot them down. But America wasn't building for survival, it was building for victory. And every crate unloaded on those rainy British mornings made that victory feel a little closer. In the belly of the factories back home, the rhythm of production became a heartbeat for the nation. Night after night, the windows of massive plants glowed like cities of their own, humming with workers who barely had time to catch their breath between shifts. Many were women whose husbands, brothers, or sons were fighting overseas. They tightened bolts with the same determination others carried rifles. They wiped sweat from their eyes, leaned into the noise, and worked with a fierceness they hadn't known they possessed. Some kept photographs of loved ones pinned beside their stations. Others whispered silent prayers with each plane that left the line, hoping theirs might be the one that protected someone dear. At Willow Run, B-24s rolled out in such staggering numbers that military officers visiting for inspection simply fell silent at the sight. It was as if someone had taken the concept of mass production and stretched it far beyond what anyone had believed possible. A bomber a day became a bomber every hour, then faster, and the skies above Michigan trembled from the constant thunder of test flights. Each engine's roar shook the glass in nearby towns, a reminder to locals that the war was not thousands of miles away. It was being fought right there in the factories, bolt by bolt. As more bombers took flight, Germany's cities faced the growing weight of American air power. The Luftwaffe scrambled to defend the Reich, but their pilots were exhausted, their fuel dwindling, their planes aging faster than they could be replaced. The once feared German fighter force found itself outmatched not only in skill and equipment, but in simple arithmetic. For every German plane shot down, America could send 2 more to replace it. Soon 3, then more. And Göring, once proud and loud, found himself increasingly silent as the skies over Germany darkened with the shadows of machines. he had once mocked. By late 1944, the truth could not be buried. America had built more than 100 Zero aircraft, enough to fill fields, enough to blanket continents, enough to overwhelm even the most fortified Axis positions. The factories still roared, still glowed, still poured out machines with a momentum that felt unstoppable. Even in small towns across America, people knew the numbers. They read them in newspapers, heard them on radios, repeated them with pride at dinner tables. The impossible had become reality, and the nation had proven something to itself and to the world. Mock them, doubt them, underestimate them, and they would answer with thunder. In Germany, Göring avoided discussing aircraft production altogether. His earlier laughter had become a ghost that followed him down every hallway, a reminder of how confidently he had dismissed the might of a people he believed too soft, too distracted, too civilian. But the echo of his laughter had long since been drowned out by the sound of countless American engines crossing the sky. Engines built by hands he had never imagined would challenge him, hands belonging to factory workers, mothers, teenagers, immigrants, farmers, mechanics, all united by a common purpose. And as the war pushed toward its final, brutal chapters, those engines became the drumbeat of a world that was changing faster than anyone could control, carrying with them the weight of a promise that had reshaped the fate of nations.